Hello, how are you doing tonight? We are here at Ask the Team on the .NET Core team, and we have got an amazing group of people here to answer your questions. Now, the questions are going to come in via the Q&A, so go ahead and give us whatever questions you've got, and we'll be trying to organize them a little bit, and so it may take a bit to answer. But to start with, I am going to introduce the folks that are going to be talking to you tonight. And first up, we've got Jared Parsons.
Hey, I'm Jared Parsons. I'm the dev lead on the C# compiler team and a member of the C# language design team.
And this is Fred Silverberg. I'm sorry, Fred. I'm fumbled on your name.
No one can say it right. Hi, I'm Fred Silverberg. I am also a member of the C# compiler team and on the C# language design team as well.
Hi, my name is Olia Gavrish, and I am program manager on a .NET Desktop. So I'm working with WinForms and WPF.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Lickness. I'm a program manager for .NET Data. So I'm interested in all the ways .NET developers deal with data. A big piece of that is Entity Framework. So if you have Entity Framework core related questions, I'm the person to ask.
Hi, I'm Rainer Sigwald. I'm a dev, mostly maintaining MS Build and also on the .NET Core SDK team.
Hello, everyone. I'm Daniel Roth, and I'm a program manager on the ASP.NET team, currently working on Blazor.
Hi, my name is Michaela Hutchinson. I'm a PM, and I work on a range of things across .NET. I'm currently focusing on how Xamarin fits into .NET 5 and 6, and what Maui will look like.
Hello, friends. I'm Emil Landworth. I'm a program manager on the .NET Platform team. So what I'm focusing on is the class library experience, .NET Standard, the new TFMs we talked about in the blog post. That's kind of my brainchild.
So I told you we had a great group of people. It's a bunch of us here tonight, so we're going to be able to answer questions on a lot of different things. Emma's going to be helping me queue up the questions, and so let's see if we've got anything to start with. Emma, what are people thinking about tonight?
Yeah, there's already lots of questions in the chat, so it's actually quite a challenge to get them all organized.
So you're trying to organize them right now. Let's see. Why don't you grab one off the top, and we'll get started with that while you organize the rest of them.
Yeah, so let me just start with the C# one. So there was the question of what is the status on source generators and what is the status on records?
Want me to go for that one? Where I figured that one was going to be there somewhere. So the status for source generators is that they've been in the products since Visual Studio 16.6 Preview 3, as well as .NET Core CLI Preview 4. The status is that we have essentially the backend compiler work is the initial version is implemented, so you can write source generators. Upcoming for .NET 5 Preview 5, we're going to have the support for essentially pushing MS Build properties and pushing properties off of item specs into source generators. And following that, as we get closer to 16.8 and the release of .NET 5, we're going to be working on kind of more the mechanics of the IDE experience and just the overall, like making source generators easier to work with, easier to debug, and that type of support. As for our records, if you watched Dustin and Matt's talks today, as well as Scott and Scott, you saw that they were kind of demoing our latest support for records. Our plan is we want to get them into Visual Studio by 16.7 Preview 3, and that will be something fairly close to what we're going to be shipping at RTM. Maybe a little bit short on features, but definitely on the path for what we're shipping.
All right, so that was a pretty good coverage of the timeline. Can you back up a minute and give us a little bit more on what source generators are and what records are, at least at a high level?
So source generators are essentially, it's a way for developers to essentially expand the impact of their libraries by plugging into the compilation process. So in the same ways that analyzers can hook into the compilation, and it can look fine-grained at symbols, source files, or pretty much any aspect using the whole Wesam API, and emit very fine-grained diagnostics and say like, hey, you're using this API incorrectly, you could do this better. Source generators can augment the compilation by emitting more code. You can essentially look at what the developer is doing, hints the developer is getting it, and generate supporting code. For instance, if you were writing a serializer and you wanted to, instead of relying on your library to just use reflection to do all the serialization, you could use a source generator to look at how your serialization library was being used by the customer and just generate the straight line C# code to do the serialization instead of relying on reflection. But in source generators in general, that's the power they offer, is we give you the full power of the Wesam API to essentially inspect the developer's code and emit supporting code for your library. Records, on the other hand, are a feature for C#. It's a feature that's present in a lot of other languages, which is essentially a very kind of simple and concise way of declaring immutable data. Essentially, if you wanted to declare like a very simple struct like point, which, you know, X and Y, and you wanted to have immutability, you wanted to have equality, you wanted to plug into other features like deconstruction, that would take you quite a bit of C# code to write about somewhere between like 70 to a little over 100 lines of code. Whereas with records, it can be as simple as a single line, where you can just declare these very simple data types. They're very opinionated, and they opt into a number of existing BCL and C# features, and you just get it all for free as a part of declaring the type.
All right, so it sounds like records are going to let us write less code, and source generation is going to let there be more code after we run the compiler and we're looking at I/O based on other things. I think I-notify property change is one of the quintessential things in that space. But there's a lot of other places that we're seeing source generation become interesting. So that's going to be an awesome space going forward. So
we actually have one of the first samples I made. Chris is the dev on our team who's doing the source generators work. The first sample I made him write was, how do you do I-notify property change with source generators? And that sample's up on Wesam-SDK right now.
Oh, all right. Okay, Wesam-SDK. We got samples ready to go on source generation. All right, so I'm going to go back to email and see if we can find, see if we can get some more questions up here.
Yeah, so one of the questions comes for the Blazor folks, which I guess is Dan here on our side. So one question was, does the .NET Core framework provide everything necessary to authenticate with our campus shibboleth, which I'm not even sure whether I pronounce it correctly, IDP when deploying a Blazor web app to an on-premise Windows server? And then related to that was, when deploying Blazor web app to Azure, can we auth end with our campus shibboleth IDP without having to implement a separate Active Directory?
Yeah, so that's actually more of a security question, I think, than really a Blazor question. I mean, just to address how Blazor deals with authentication, if you have a Blazor server app, it's really just an ASP.NET Core app. So all of the normal authentication infrastructure applies. So you can take advantage of the authentication support in ASP.NET Core. In a Blazor WebAssembly app, typically you're going to use an OpenID Connect-based flow in order to authenticate users and handle authentication on the client. SAML support, unfortunately, I'm not aware of any built-in support for SAML in .NET Core. I was poking around on the internet a little bit myself to see if I could find anything about SAML support in .NET Core. I know we have support for OpenID Connect and JA tokens and OAuth 2 and those things. I believe we also have WS Federation support, but I'm not aware of SAML support, and honestly, I'm not the best person to answer this question. Barry Dorans, if you can find him on Twitter, is our security curmudgeon, and I kid you not, that is his title. And I would encourage you to ping him and ask about SAML support in .NET Core. He can probably answer that for you.
All right, Emma, what do we have next?
So then another question in the Blazor context that came up is new worker service template in .NET Core, or I guess it's not Blazor, but it's ASP.NET. So Dan is the right guy for that. New worker service template in .NET Core 3.0 is amazing for messaging-based apps. What is the expected deployment model for them to Azure App Service on Linux? Right-click deployment allows to deploy them as web jobs on Windows, but web jobs are not available on Linux.
Oh man. Okay. Yeah. So, well, if you're not familiar with the worker template, there's a new worker template for like long-running processes in ASP.NET Core that I think shipped in like .NET Core 3. So last year. It's basically just effectively a console app process. So right-click deployment in Linux, I don't know the answer to that one either, unfortunately. I would have to go do some poking around. But it's effectively just a a standalone process. So if you can get that running in a Linux container, they should be able just to execute it basically in a Linux container. There is some interesting stuff also happening in the ASP.NET Core world around like microservices and orchestration. There's a project called TIE that you also might look at, but it's not really going to address the simple right-click deployment for a worker service. You might have to hand roll your own deployment solution there.
Yeah, so just to follow up on that, so what roles can .NET Core play in microservice architecture, and can .NET Core play the role of Node.js?
Oh yeah, I mean, yes and better. So .NET Core is a fantastic platform for building microservices. You're trying to build decoupled standalone services that can run in a container-based environment that can then be orchestrated. .NET Core is a fantastic platform for that, and one of the big reasons is performance. Like if you look at the performance of .NET Core for request per second style workloads, .NET Core will dwarf the performance of Node. Like a good place to look at the performance characteristics there, or to check out the public TechEmpower benchmarks. It's basically an open source set of benchmarks that compares the performance of pretty much every stack on the planet in an open source fashion, and .NET Core does very, very well on those benchmarks, especially when compared to Node.
All right, Emo, what else do we have in the queue out there?
So there was a few questions on WinForms. So by the way, like the incoming rate is much higher than what I can process. It seems like every time I take something off, like 5 more things get added. So it might be very slow in my responses. Apologies for that. But so on the WinForms side, there's a few questions around do you have plans to update WinForms control authoring documentation with .NET Core 3.1 and .NET 5 design time support? Any ETA on that?
So I'm not sure, is that a question about documentation for WinForms or authoring, like licensing? So I can say for documentation, yes, we're working on updating the documentation, and there's a lot of work needs to be done, but we are partnering with our docs team and we're working on it right now. You already can see some new articles dedicated specifically to .NET Core and .NET 5 and porting from .NET Framework to .NET Core, and more to come.
Related to that, do you have any plans about including elements of fluid design system, material, light, motion, scale, depth into WinForms and WPF world? Currently, it's available in UWP. It would be great if in .NET 5, at least some things will be available in WPF and WinForms as well.
Right. That's a great question. There is a technology called XAML Islands that allows you to host a UWP control in your WinForms or your WPF applications. And we have some wrappers for existing controls that you can just install NuGet package and go ahead and use them. And for everything else, you will have to do a little bit implementation on your own to wrap the UWP control, but it is possible right now. And that's also, there's also a project called WinUI. We just released a new version of WinUI 3. That decouples UWP controls, and that's also something very interesting to look at. I will publish a link to that blog post.
I think the question was a bit about the material design. I think it's less about the controls, it's more about the styles.
In WinForms, we are not going to implement those controls. They will not become the part of WinForms as for now. But there are ways how you can embed those controls in your WinForms applications. And that's with XAML Islands. And in future with WinUI, maybe. I know the team is looking in that direction and investigating. And again, if there's some controls that are very highly desirable, please leave us feedback, because we plan our roadmap based on what we hear from communities, what we learn from user studies. So if you have a need for something, please go ahead to WinForms repository and create an issue request. And we read them all, we look at them all, we prioritize our roadmap according to those items.
All right, what else are people talking about, Ima? It sounds like we're getting a lot of questions out there, and I'm hoping we get a couple of them answered by folks typing in the Q&A. But what else do we have to talk about?
Yeah, so one other question that comes up here is things related to basically the thing I'm working on, .NET Standard. Like with .NET Core 3.1, we see some breaking changes in public APIs comparing with .NET Core 3.0. Some of them are reasonable, but some look like mistakes. Do you accept complaints about that? Do you apply other breaking changes in public APIs in .NET 5? So the one thing I can say is we don't make breaking changes in APIs by accident usually, because that's the one thing we really track relatively well. Behavior is much more harder for us to do, but we have Compat labs for that as well. We have breaking change notifications for every release. So you can look up the APIs that we have changed behavior for, or where we actually removed APIs. In general, the way to think about this is that we will definitely do fewer, if even none, breaking changes in the base class library, like the lower level, like the system namespaces. The higher levels, like WinForms and ASP.NET, we're a bit more liberal with breaking changes, but even there we try to be somewhat conservative and not break the universe, of course. And then, yeah, that's basically the general approach to breaking changes. You can generally complain about them by just filing issues on GitHub. And you can even find PRs that introduce breaking changes by looking for the breaking change label in most of our repos. You just have to find the repo that corresponds to the thing you want to complain about. That's usually the best thing. Is there a plan to merge .NET Core and Xamarin? Yes, sort of, right? So Michaela can probably talk a little bit more about this, but I mentioned the TFM plan. So we have a plan where we can effectively say, depending on what app you're building, if you want to build a Windows-specific app or a Xamarin-specific app of iOS and Android, we have new target framework names that make that a lot easier. And then on the implementation side, we do plan to have effectively a singular .NET implementation with tweaked runtimes for particular workloads, right? But it's not going to be what we have today, where we have effectively two different kinds of .NET, and we use .NET Standard to unify them by API shape. We actually have a unified implementation. Not with .NET 5 though, but that's the plan moving forward. Michaela, do you want to add anything to that?
Yes, so we also announced today that Xamarin iOS will be renamed to .NET, .NET for iOS, and Xamarin Android will be renamed to .NET for Android. So it is being integrated into a core part of .NET itself, rather than something that is just added on. And if you look in the .NET runtime repo on GitHub, for example, you can find already the runtime that powers iOS and Android apps has been merged into that repo. And there's a lot of ongoing work, but it's going to take time.
All right. Is that the only thing we have right now on Xamarin? Because we've got the Maui announcement today, and so there's lots of exciting stuff going on in that space.
So what I've seen is somebody said, not really a question, but can we say anything about Maui? So maybe it's worthwhile Michaela giving like a 30-second brain dump on that.
All right, well, I think that's a great idea. Let me, Michaela, you can get started. We'll get your picture up here in just a second.
Yeah, so Maui is the new multi-platform application UI toolkit, which is going to be part of .NET 6. We've announced that and put the work in the public so that you can see our work ongoing. That repo is now available on GitHub, and it's an evolution of Xamarin Forms. So it has the same concept of an abstraction that's built on top of the underlying native toolkit, so you get native controls, native behaviors, native look and feel, but you can also drop down directly to the underlying native layer if you need platform-specific customizations. So but it's not just, we're not just taking Xamarin Forms and renaming it. This is very much an evolution. There's architectural changes to the way it works, to the way the renderer infrastructure works. For example, we're adding more supported platforms, including Windows, and exploring MVU style programming models too.
So I think that's one of the things that I'm looking forward to most coming up. I know it's going to be a little ways out, but I'm hoping that sometime, we'll be able to play with the previews short of a year and a half, but it's going to be a little ways out. But I think it's super exciting that we're going to be able to play with these, with this UI stack that is going to look like Android on Android and look like iOS on iOS, and we're going to be able to write our code once, and a good chunk of it that can just rely on the way the controls are interpreted is just going to work. And that is super. I just am so excited about seeing that coming down the road. So yeah. So anything else on that, or we're just gonna have to wait, right? It's just a patience game on this one, right?
So there's a few more questions.
You can go and check out the repo and look at it and build it if you're curious, but I wouldn't expect like usable preview bits until probably the end of the year or something, and it will be in its final form in the .NET 6 timeframe. So there is a way to go.
Ivan, did you have another Xamarin type question on that part of the house?
There was one more question. Question of Maui, if this is applicable, is it going to be XAML based? I saw the demo earlier and he was designing the Maui GUI in the CS file.
It will support XAML. It will also support doing your UI directly in code. And also MVU style approaches, whether that is based on Razor or C#, we haven't fully determined yet. But it's going to allow you to write your code multiple ways. If you like to use XAML and MVVM, you can do that. If you prefer to do MVU and keep everything in C#, you can do that. And you can mix and match different parts of your app in different styles.
Cool.
So there are a few questions on EF. Will custom data types be supported by EF Core? What are the design time support available in .NET Core? Is there any difference in EF and EF Core going forward? And what's the best way to trigger an EF Core migration?
Okay, few questions there. So differences in EF and EF Core moving forward. EF, Entity Framework 6, is that last version that's in maintenance mode. So it will be supported. And the reason why EF6 has two flavors, EF6 runs on .NET Framework and .NET Core. So the idea is it can be a migration path if you're moving from the framework to .NET Core. EF Core is a new product moving forward. I posted in chat, you can go to aka.ms/EFCore5, and that will give you the roadmap that we have. As far as design time support, there's a couple pieces there. There's the actual model designer, and there is no current plan to use that model designer. That was a feature in prior versions of Entity Framework that is not on the roadmap for EF Core. If you're talking about support for design time data binding, for example, the WinForms experience where you can navigate to a collection, pull that collection in and data bind, that experience is coming into, I believe it's there in the WinForms designer right now. And then there was a third question, I believe.
What is the best way to trigger an EF Core migration?
Okay, so that's a good one. Traditionally, the migrations existed in whatever project you sort of installed your data context in, and there was a little bit of confusion about the best practice for this. In EF Core 5, we're working on something called a migration bundle. And what a migration bundle does is it allows you to output a bundle that executable has only one task, and that task is to run migrations. So in that case, the use case here is for workloads that might be, for example, distributed in a Kubernetes, microservices, multiple instances. You don't want to run a migration on startup because you could have multiple instances starting up at the same time and you get a conflict. And so the goal is to have this migration bundle that can be an artifact of your continuous integration, continuous deployment pipeline. And you would run this bundle that would apply the schema changes. If everything goes fine, you move forward with deploying the rest of the app. If it doesn't, you pull back. So that's the plan. If you go to the aka.ms/efcore5, you can see the section on migration bundle. It links to that issue, and you can see the plans for that. But that will be coming out in EFCore 5.
And when you say aka, all you mean is AKA? So
that's
AKA,
right, aka.ms. Yep.
This is our short URL, but you can count on it coming from Microsoft when it's aka.ms. And then you said EF5 is after that?
EFCore 5. And I posted it in the Q&A.
Excellent, excellent. All right. Okay, Emo, what do we have next?
Yeah, so let me go over this. So there's a few questions on .NET Framework and .NET Core migration in general, which I think I can probably answer. So what is the time frame for support of the old .NET Framework? When will we have to move to .NET Core? In general, you don't have to move probably ever, because .NET Framework ships with Windows. So as a Windows component, it's effectively as long supported as Windows is supported. So we will keep the lights on this guy for a very long time. The only thing that we have set is that we will no longer innovate in .NET Framework, so don't expect new language features or runtime features, right? So if you're happy with the app as it is, keep it on .NET Framework. There's no need to move because you're afraid that we would turn off the lights. That's not going to happen. Can you talk about the future of .NET Core, and is it possible that it will be turned into a project like Silverlight? It's kind of like the, predict the future kind of exercises, but like I don't think that comparison necessarily holds. Silverlight was great for many reasons, but it was effectively tied to the browser execution model similar to Flash. And so I think part of the reason why it didn't work was because that model hasn't worked. But with Blazor, we're kind of going back to something like it, if you like writing C# that runs in the browser, right? So I think that's something where it's hard to predict the future. Let me actually grab my editor again. My company has a bunch of legacy applications that are written in full framework web forms. Is the plan for .NET 5 still to drop support for web forms? If so, what should we do moving forward? Will we still need to maintain i11 compatibility? So Blazor, Wesam, so far isn't really an option for us. Dan, do you want to take this?
I missed the first part of it. I heard the IE11 compatibility issue. Like, what do you do if you want to run in older browsers, and you want to? Is it specifically for Blazor or just in general?
I think the first part was my company has a bunch of legacy apps that are written in full framework web forms. Is the plan for .NET 5 still to drop support for web forms? If so, what should we do moving forward?
Right. So .NET Framework doesn't have a end of support that I believe that we've announced. So you can continue to run your web forms applications on .NET Framework, and you're perfectly in support. Like .NET Framework, you have to remember, ships with Windows as a platform. So as long as .NET Framework ships with Windows, you're supported as part of Windows. So there's no need once .NET 5 ships for you to abandon all of your ASP.NET Web Forms applications. They're still completely supported on the existing .NET Framework. Now, if you are looking for a migration path because you want to modernize, like you want to take your apps and take advantage of some of the newer framework features, take advantage of .NET Core, a migration from ASP.NET Web Forms to Blazor is an interesting option. To be clear, these are very different frameworks. Like, they're not the same code. There's no source code or binary compatibility between these two things, but they do have a lot of similarities in terms of their flavor. Like, they both are a UI component-based model. They both have a stateful programming model, event-based, event-driven. So if you start coding with Blazor, it will feel familiar if you're coming from a web forms background. Blazor does require, though, newer modern browsers. So if you want to run on WebAssembly, you're going to need a browser that supports WebAssembly. That immediately rules out IE, even IE11. Blazor Server does run on IE11 because it doesn't require WebAssembly. You can just add the necessary polyfills and get that to work. So if IE11 is sufficient, then Blazor Server may be an option. If you need older versions of IE, your mileage will probably go down pretty fast. And there's nothing wrong with working code on ASP.NET Web Forms, still supported. No need to fret. No need to rush to migrate.
Okay, Emo, what are you looking at now? What do you want to bring up
So there's a few more questions on C#. What's the story for language interop on .NET? More specifically, will I ever be able to build a library completely in C# and export methods to interop with C?
Who wants to take that one?
I got it. So in terms of that, like you've been able, in terms of exporting methods to C, like, or I think what you're essentially asking is for something like a decal spec or something of that nature. It's always been possible to, not directly from C#, but essentially to have like small little C wrapper libraries which call into any kind of .NET library. However, you're always going to need essentially a .NET runtime to be in that process. So it's interacting between C and C# is going to get quite a bit easier in some aspects in the upcoming release, especially because we're adding support for function pointers into C#. However, at the end of the day, if you want to essentially call from C into .NET, you are likely going to have some level of, there's still going to be some level of C code that you're going to need to write to wrap your .NET code, and it's always going to end up having a .NET runtime in that process.
Yeah, so then why are new C# language features only supported on new .NET Core releases when so many previous language features were supported with polyfills on older runtimes?
Philip's not here, Emo, so do you want to take that one, or?
Yeah, I can take this one. So basically the question boils down to how do we think of C# and the platform, I guess, as a singular version train, right? In the past, the way it works, you could always use the latest version of C# on any .NET version. This was largely possible because not every language feature requires changes in the runtime or in the library space. On the .NET Core side, we have found that because we can innovate across the stack much more fast now, we actually want to take advantage of this. And so we're now in a situation where many C# features actually require library changes in order to be actually usable, right? The easiest thing is, take async programming. You kind of have to return a task type in order to make this useful, or tuples. And we generally don't want to do polyfills in .NET Framework anymore because every time we add an API, it gets relatively complicated for us to reason about the compatibility matrix across our frameworks. It's a bit hard to explain, but if anybody ever used tuples on older versions of .NET Framework, they know what I'm talking about. There are definitely been issues with binding redirects and all the other fun stuff that comes with that. And so we basically said we don't want to be in this boat anymore. And so we basically decided that we will tie the language version to the platform version so that they can, that we can reason about them as one unit rather than as independent things with polyfills. In general, though, like the compiler does not have a hard stop for this. So you can target older versions. It just means that certain language features are not going to be supported. And since we don't want to be in the boat of documenting which combination of language features is supported, we're basically just saying the language as a whole is not supported on older versions. That doesn't mean that it explodes when you compile it. It just means that you are in unsupported territory and you have to basically make sense of this by yourself. There's another question. How do the new data records behave in terms of heap/stack allocation?
Records in C# you can either define records in terms of classes or structs, and the way that they work with heap allocation is no different than classes or structs today. So whatever your mental model is around when to use a class or when to use a struct, you would apply that to whether or not to using record classes and record structs.
That sounds pretty easy.
Yeah, I was about to say that was a short answer.
Yeah, that's straightforward. There's no trickiness in that. Yeah. So records are really just shortcuts to a bunch of extra goodness in the way that we write code, right? So it's a short way to write a class that has extra features. It has, basically can support immutability. We don't know what all the features are finally going to be, but value equality, some of that kind of stuff is going to be part of records, it looks like, or I know that the language, that particular design feature has gone around a little bit. Anybody watching our language design notes is going to have seen some changes in that space. So what did Naz and Dustin show today?
What did they show for the record?
Yeah, is it the short version, or is it? I didn't watch their talk yet. I'm on the design team, and I'm not sure where we landed on this one.
So the version of records they show is fairly close to what we're going to be putting out in 16.7p3, and it is supporting records that basically have support for value equality by default, implementing iEquitable, exporting all of the operators, as well as like deconstruction. Deconstruction might not make P3, but that will just be there at RTM.
So there's going to be some extra features there that a class or structure normally doesn't have that can be kind of tricky to write yourself. It's an easy place to mess up your code, and I think some people kind of cut that corner. And so I think it's really cool that we're going to actually get that just by creating this simple record. We're going to get those extra features there just to make it super easy to do an immutable class in a good way. So Emo. How are we doing on the Q&A? Are we still behind, or are we catching up?
No, we're definitely not catching up. The questions
Thank
coming
you all
faster
for
than we can answer
questions.
them.
This is absolutely. We were, it's great to have too many questions. I'm just sorry that if we may not get to all of them. So yeah, what do you think looks next? Are you looking at the most liked questions too, or just trying to keep up with them one way or the other? I appreciate you watching them as they come in.
Yes, all of the above. I try to publish so people can answer them in chat, but I'm also trying to pick some that I find interesting. So there's one here that came up, is what's the timeline for WPF and Co, which I assume means WinForms and other things. So what's the timeline for WPF and Co to move to Linux and Mac?
Well, Ole, I'm going to let you say something on that. I think the question is just about timeline, and unannounced features don't have much timeline.
Right, I can take this question. So we're not planning to move WPF or WinForms to Linux. Those two platforms will remain Windows only because they have a very tight connection to Windows APIs. But they are a part of .NET Core and will be a part of .NET 5, but they will still remain Windows only. For our multi-platform story, you can check out Maui. That is a multi-platform solution that we just released at Build. So maybe that would be a way to go for if you have a cross-platform scenarios.
All right.
That was one question related to that. So what direction can you give for focusing on UI development for the future Blazor, Maui, WinForms, UWP, WPF? Not sure where we should focus on development resources for new projects.
That's a good question. That goes across a lot of people that we've got here right now. Does somebody want to try to step back and give a big picture on that? We'll give a shot at it. Or Dan, why don't you jump in here?
Talk to the Blazor angle of that and how you should think about Blazor in that story. Like Blazor is built to fill in what was historically a gap for .NET developers. If you wanted to write any code that ran client side in a web app, like on the user's machine in the browser, there was no way to do that with .NET unless we go way back to the plugin that shall not be named that then basically became defunct. But now with Open Web Standards, there's a way to do that, and Blazor is a programming model specifically for client-side web UI. So if you have a scenario where you're trying to build client-side web UI, then that's where Blazor fits into the picture. And to the extent that you want to leverage your client-side web UI in other places, then that's where Blazor stays interesting. Like maybe you've built some UI already in your web app and you want to leverage that someplace else, or maybe you have a bunch of devs that are already building web UI and you need them to build a native mobile application. That type of scenario is where we think Blazor is interesting.
So if you want to run your app in a browser where you've got client side and the browser stuff going on, then Blazor is the story. So, and then if you want to run on Windows and you want to use a simpler, straightforward kind of way to build your application, you've got WinForms and then WPF. And then if you want Windows 10 specific features, things that are really cool, but they're specific to Windows 10, and you've got UWP and WinUI. And then if you want to do cross-platform, then that's what we're going with Maui as the cross-platform solution, because you can write it in XAML if you want and have XAML run everywhere. But the problem is when you come down to the individual controls and the actual details of what's going on screen, it's a little bit different across these platforms. And so taking something that was designed at core for Windows and then yanking it across to the other platforms is hard. So I understand it's a problem. If you're out there going, hey, I just want one UI, what should I be working on? It's a little tricky because you still have the browser or client decision to make. And then once you make the client decision, you have to decide where you're going to be targeting. And so those are still, it's still a conversation you're going to have in picking a UI stack. It has not suddenly become a non-question. And I think that's across the whole industry right now, is because there's a lot going into that aspect. Does anybody else have anything on that? If not, we'll flip back to Emo and see what he's got next.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk about UI in general. So one question that came up is, will Maui be able to create desktop apps, and will it work with the new WinUI?
I'm sorry, what was that? I didn't catch.
Will Maui be able to create desktop apps, and will it work with the new WinUI?
Well, I'm sending the Maui questions over to Michaela, so see if she can.
Desktop apps, yes. That is part of the expansion of support for more platforms. At least initially on Windows, it will use WPF as a backend rather than WinUI, and that'll give it access to a broader range of Windows versions. But I'm sure we'll be following the progress of WinUI and look at supporting that in future.
Yeah, on that note, people were asking is, how does .NET 6, .NET 5, .NET 6, Project Reunion and Maui relate to each other? I'm not sure you saw the Project Reunion announcement from the Windows team today.
I did not.
Then let's skip this one. There's another Unity-related question, but you probably can also answer. Unity has great support for .NET and is used for HoloLens work. Is the .NET team actively working with other game engines like CryEngine or Unreal to provide similar first-party support for C#?
So the CryEngine folks actually did their own C# integration, which you can get already. For Unreal Engine, I actually have a project myself, which is a C# plugin for Unreal Engine. I haven't been super active maintaining it recently. I've been in contact with the Unreal folks, but it's not something that, it's not something that they've chosen to invest in.
So in the game space, we're the game companies are leading in terms of coming to C# and .NET. We're helping them where we can, where they want us, but pretty much they're leading the charge for their own businesses and what they're doing to support their game developers. And Unity is all in, and it sounds like that CryEngine is also working on it, but Unreal's not. It's not a major priority for them right now.
Yeah, it is definitely an interesting space, and any folks who are, say, building their own engine and want to integrate .NET support, I could definitely provide some pointers on how to do that. We also have the runtime running on the game's consoles on Xbox and PlayStation, so folks who are part of those developer programs can get a hold of those.
Oh, cool. Awesome. Awesome.
So that's a nice segue, because we just talked about games. Any support inbox or coming in Blazor Wesam for rendering pixels to a canvas for C# browser games?
So you can use any browser API in a Blazor app that you want. That you can do that through the JavaScript interop mechanism that Blazor provides. Some of those browser APIs we provide convenient C# wrappers for out of the box, like for making HTTP requests using the browser fetch API. Well, we implement HP client that way. If you want to open a WebSocket connection, well, we implement the .NET WebSocket API using the underlying browser APIs. So in some cases, we make this super easy for you, but you can always, if you need to, drop down and call into whatever JavaScript you'd like to. For example, there are libraries, third-party community libraries for interacting with the Canvas APIs and so forth. One of the demos that I showed earlier today in a Blazor WebAssembly app was using 3JS within a Blazor WebAssembly app to do a nice 3D rendering of a car that you could zoom and select different parts of. So you can do anything that the browser can do from Blazor WebAssembly. The one word of caution is that in a Blazor app, particularly when you're running on the WebAssembly runtime, the WebAssembly runtime is an IL interpreter. It's not a JIT-based runtime, which means it's not great for like really CPU-intensive workloads. So if you're trying to like write a ray tracer, for example, probably not going to want to do that in .NET code running on the WebAssembly runtime because it would probably be a little sluggish. You might want to choose a different strategy for that, like using a WebAssembly module or writing that code in JavaScript.
Okay, so then I think there was a few other related Blazor questions. Is it possible to deploy a Blazor Wesam PWA that will be served within an existing ASP.NET Core app? For example, ASP.NET Core app serving the static files under a given endpoint. Oh
yeah, absolutely. I mean, our templates effectively do that. If I understand the question correctly, you can do file new project, create a Blazor WebAssembly app. Select an option to say that you'd like it to be ASP.NET Core hosted, which all that means is that the static files that get built from the Blazor WebAssembly app will be hosted by the ASP.NET Core app. It'll be your web server, your file server for those files. And then you can select another option that says, and by the way, please make this a PWA, and we'll give you the manifest file and the service worker so that it can be installed natively on the device, like pinned to your home screen or run from the Win10 start menu, and also function offline. And you can do that just by creating a new project. So yes, that's absolutely supported. And you can even roll Blazor into your existing ASP.NET Core apps just by adding components where you'd like to have them in your existing MVC views or Razor pages.
Yeah, so with Blazor WebAssembly, can you access things like I/O ports from the browser? At my work, we have scale devices that we currently connect to via Java, Bean, and Oracle forms. That's the name I've not heard in a long time. Would Blazor be able to replace that?
So when you're running client-side in the browser, like if you're running on WebAssembly, you're running in the browser security sandbox. So you can do anything that you could do with JavaScript. You can call any browser API and use all of the standards that the browser implements support for. But you don't get ungated access to the user's device. You can't just like do whatever you want with the file system. You can't open arbitrary network connections. You can make HTTP requests, you can open WebSocket requests, but you're still living within that security sandbox. Now, when you're on the server, if you're using Blazor Server, which is a slightly different model where you're running your UI components on the server on .NET Core, and then handling all of the UI interactions using a real-time WebSocket connection with the browser. When you're running on the server, well, you have full access to all of .NET Core's capabilities at that point. You're not running in the browser, so you're not constrained in that way. You don't have access, well, not easy direct access to the user's device, but you have full access to all of the server capabilities because your components are running right there. So anything you want to connect to, like databases or APIs or whatever, you can absolutely do that on the server.
So I'm not entirely sure you answered this, but the related question was, any plans of having hybrid apps that use Blazor but is allowed to access the Windows system?
Yeah, so we've actually done some experiments with this already. We had an experiment out there of using Blazor with like an Electron application. If you're not familiar with Electron, Electron is basically like a browser, a Chromium shell embedded in a desktop app. And typically you then write your UI using JavaScript and web technologies, HTML and CSS. So like apps like Visual Studio Code, I believe even Teams, that the Microsoft Teams product are implemented as Electron apps. We've done experiments where instead of running JavaScript, you just use .NET Core to run your Blazor components and then drive the Electron shell using your Blazor UI components. So those apps you're running on .NET Core directly on the machine as a native desktop app. You just happen to be using web tech for the UI, but you can do anything on the machine that you'd like. Another experimental project that we've been working on with our friends on the Xamarin team is a project called the Mobile Blazor Bindings. And mobile Blazor bindings is a little different, where you take the Blazor component model, but instead of rendering to HTML, you replace Blazor's renderer with a renderer that can render directly to native UI controls. Very similar in spirit to Xamarin Forms, but instead of writing XAML, you're writing Razor and using more of a web-style programming model. Those apps also are fully native, and you have full access to the native capabilities of the device. In those cases, typically you're running on Xamarin's .NET runtime, but instead of rendering web UI, you're rendering actual native UI. So those are our experimental projects that we've been looking at. Neither of those have a a concrete roadmap yet, but those are areas of active exploration.
Yeah, so there's a few questions regarding compatibility with .NET Framework in general. Will .NET 5 run apps built for .NET Framework 4, or is it going to be more like the transition from .NET to 3.5 to .NET 4? This was the cause of much confusion with customers. This is what is MS doing to help avoid this confusion again? So the general answer to that is you should think of .NET 5 effectively as a .NET Core version 4.0, right? If you're an existing customer. The reason we call it .NET 5 is basically to just make it clear that this is the continuation and that there's not going to be a .NET Framework 5, so there's no innovation happening on that platform. But in terms of porting, it's still the same effort that you had before, except that since .NET Core 2.0, we have added a ton of more APIs to .NET Core to make it easier to move existing applications over. We generally don't port many more features from .NET Framework to .NET Core. So there's actually a list of things we already announced that we will not going to support on .NET Core. App domains and remoting are just two things that come to my mind here. But we have certainly ported a few more things here and there as part of the compat pack that we have for .NET Core. So you can continue to use these things if you want to move your .NET Framework apps over to .NET 5. That's the same mechanism. It also answers the other questions like how much effort is expected to upgrade to .NET Core. You should not think of .NET Framework to .NET Core as an upgrade, as in like you just change the settings somewhere, then stuff will just work. It is still a port. You have to migrate your app from .NET Framework to .NET Core or .NET 5. At this point, it's just a version difference. And we have tools to do that. We have API port that allows you to access effectively, well, not access, but basically get a list of things you have to do in terms of API compatibility issues that you have to walk through. So there's one question that I found interesting that is kind of for the group, given that we have, 5-6 minutes left. What is an advantage of .NET Core that not many people know about?
I can jump in and talk about WinForms. So first thing that comes to mind, advantage of .NET Core is that it will be very easy to port to .NET 5, which is a future. So your application will be on the latest bits and have all the newest features that will come. And for WinForms, we just committed a new feature. It's a task dialog in .NET 5. So after many years of not adding new functionality to WinForms, we finally have a new feature, and it's a very big, exciting moment for our team. We did it with the help of our community contributor, Konstantin Preiser. And task dialog, you can think of it as a very customizable, super advanced message box that allows you to create different headers, multi-page dialogues, and so on. It's pretty awesome. I will publish the link in the chat, so go ahead, check it out.
All right, I'll jump in here and tell you one of my favorite ones, which is the .NET Core has an ecosystem around it in terms of the tooling associated with it. So .NET Core, they're originally called Global Tools, but we now just call them .NET Tools because there's global and local and a toolpath approach, and this is all documented, and they are super easy to write. So if you have little things that your group, or maybe you do want to put it on NuGet and share it with the world, you can write that super easy. There's a side project called System Command Line that makes it easy to create the CLI for that so that the parsing isn't hard. And in the end, you can create these little .NET tools that you can easily install onto your team's machine or your organization, or put them on NuGet for the whole world. And they're super easy to write. And so things like, I don't know, whatever you can think of that you want to do, evaluating global.json, things like that, you can write those really easily. And I think that's kind of an overlooked feature in .NET Core, so I'll bring that one up. And who wants to go next? Wave your, I can spy on people, so wave your hands. And who has a feature that they want to talk about? That's I'm going to call on Rainer. I think I know what you're going to say. Okay, so I'm priming Rainer to see if he's. So Rainer is our MS Build guru. So he answers the deep, dark MS Build questions for us. Okay, and so and he's also up at midnight for you. So so I think I know what you're going to say, and so go ahead.
All right. So yeah. So one of the most annoying things about builds is that sometimes they fail, right? And one of the best ways to deal with that is to look through your logs, through build logs. Except build logs are this horrific nightmare of, in many cases, megabytes and megabytes of text that are really hard to get through. So check out the MS Build binary logging feature and the binary log viewer at msbuildlog.com. That's not an official Microsoft product. It's produced by a person that works at Microsoft in his spare time, but it's a nice viewer that gives you a nice search and a tree-based view of how your projects were built and what all information we generate. And it's a great tool that you can use if you're having problems with your build and you'd like to get back to having problems with your code instead.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic, and all the people at Microsoft are like, we couldn't live without it. All right, so Fred, what is your favorite? Let me get over to you. Tell us what you think is an overlooked feature of .NET Core.
I guess some of the things that I don't necessarily know if it's overlooked so much as not appreciated enough. Right. But a lot of the performance work that has gone into some of the basic things that are done in everyday .NET Core, like a lot of the framework stuff has been optimized to use span, and then span itself is significantly optimized in .NET Core as compared to .NET Framework. A lot of the framework has been updated to just be a little bit better. For example, the old enum.has flag in .NET Framework was terrible. It was a terrible API. It used reflection of the hood. It was slow as heck. And the best way to test if an enum had a flag would be to do a traditional bitwise check. On .NET Core, that's fixed. Just use enum.has flag. It's fast. Just use it. So yeah, I think those are my favorite things. The little things that add up to a lot of good.
All right. Does anyone have anything else before we on that question, or anything else real quick? We are almost out of time.
Yeah, I was about to say, like, I would actually use that as the wrap up at this point, because I think it's a nice ending. So the only thing I would add is similar to what Fred just said. .NET Core just has a lot more polish, like the long tail, if you will, which I think is an outcome of open source, right? Because in open source, what ends up happening is most contributors contribute stuff that they are personally, offended by or annoyed by, right? And so one thing that I personally always disliked in .NET Framework was when you index into a dictionary and the key cannot be found. Well, then bad things happen. You get an exception, but it doesn't tell you which key it didn't find, right? So we had people contributing changes to actually just add the key to the exception message, so you know which key wasn't found. Ben Adams fixed the stack traces in .NET Core to make them more readable, right? So when you have async methods, for example, they look much nicer. And these are not the kind of features that you usually see in release notes and big blog posts, because they're too small usually. But I do fundamentally believe that the total sum of them completely change the way you perceive your development stack. It just feels more nicer, it feels more polished, and that is something that we just couldn't do just by ourselves. That is a direct outcome of us being open source and having an amazing community.
Well, that's great. So I think that's an awesome way to end this evening. I want to thank everybody who's come. I'm sorry we didn't get to all your questions. We really appreciate having all the feedback. All of this was fantastic. Thank you again for spending some time with us this evening. I'm going to go ahead and call it a wrap, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your build experience.